Welcome back. Last episode, we finally broke free from our blighted borders. So that means the whole world's my oyster, and it's time to start shucking, right? Yeah, no. No, not at all. While I am capable of short, planned excursions into tainted territory, potions of purification only work well in areas where there's no way for the taint to come back. So if I want to stay in an unsecured area, I have to deploy one of my far slower and far more expensive ethereal blooms to hold down the fort. The blooms are renewable, but scaled up production of them requires shimmer leaves, and the only renewable way I have of making those right now is with bread. And I think it's time to let my crew's colons relax for a little bit. Still, for exploration at least, they do the job just fine. Last episode's brief foray into capitalism was enough to secure me the life savings of several hundred testificates, which I can easily arbitrage into massive amounts of naughty wands full of magic juice to enable my crippling silverleaf addictions moving forward. But before I can do that, it's time for me to arbitrage your wallets. That's right, Goose sold out, and now you all get to suffer for it. Through the combined efforts of myself and Eclipsify, by which I mean Eclipsify did literally all the hard work and I just sort of sat around and waved pom-pom, you too can now own a lovely and absolutely massive goose-themed mousepad. I had no idea you could even get mousepads this big, but it's certainly a massive upgrade over my existing one, so links in the description if you want one. Anyway, it's time to go on a field trip. Put on your seatbelts, everyone, because today we're going to learn about eldritch horror beyond the ken of mortal man. And if that's too long a name for you, just call it Wednesday, they're basically synonymous. World exploration is all but required for the next stages of tech progression. While, yes, it is theoretically possible for me to beat the game in my current state, it would be both A, extremely slow and painful, and B, not really all that fun to watch, and this is because one of the most powerful and versatile mods in the pack, Botania, is gated behind picking a bunch of pretty flowers. To the surprise of literally no one, these pretty flowers are scattered all over the world, and there isn't any other way of getting them. Joy! Because of reasons, I don't actually need all of the different kinds of flowers, but their spawn locations are basically just wherever, and I do need to do some point of interest looting and expansion anyway, so we're going to be doing this for a little bit. The first stop is red flowers. They are relatively close by, are all but required for early and easy progression moving forward, and I can access them via land and unlock another teleport point, so those were the no-brainer ones. Light gray is pretty much the same thing, but in the opposite direction and with a bunch of added mountain climbing. Rather than going west from Biodome Omega, I opt to go south from Biodome Gamma, mostly just because I wanted a change of scenery. Their POI does not give me much of anything useful since it's a cave with an angry NPC and some weird flowers, and that's about it, but positionally it is quite central. Rather than head back north, I continue south down to Biodome Alpha, ganking another random NPC that had the gall to try and shoot me, and arrive without any further issues. Another detour to grab a couple of blocks of obsidian totem for future osmotic enchanting purposes, and I resume heading even further south to reach the Marble Shrine POI. Looting that gives me Shimmer Leaf and Ethereal Blooms, and Fancy Flower number 4, Urine Edition. After a brief pause to participate in the mutually beneficial exchange of goods and services, which in this case takes the form of a villager selling me 8 more swearing sticks in exchange for me not immediately slaughtering it, I restock my supply of not-so-hot leaf juice and continue my quest. This sees me swimming up a waterfall to collect Baja Blast Botania flowers while doing my level best to pilfer literally everything that is not nailed down to the floor. Speaking of nailed down to a floor, a nearby obsidian totem thing is also on my list to hit up here. In addition to netting me a bunch of obsidian totem blocks, which I will be exploiting to great effect here in a moment, this particular shrine has, hidden under a central chest, a wisp spawner. I have not the foggiest idea what on earth I would use the spawner for, but at some point I will want to come back and grab a sample of wisps to see if I can replicate them. If you care about pickaxe progression, there's also a Syraclase helm here that can be salvaged for mining tier skip reasons, but I am a little over-leveled by this point, so it isn't much use. Osmotic enchanting is the same as it always is. Lob the enchanter down, give it some goth set piece dressing, stick your wand in it, and then dump a load of this into whatever you want to become nice and sparkly. I still suffer from a complete lack of decent vis sources at the moment, which means all of my equipment gets to be enchanted with the souls of literally any moving thing that I can make unmoving with some high-intensity acupuncture, but that's basically situation normal at this point, so let's just say that Goose does Goose things, and it magically works. Many pretty colors later, and I'm now the proud owner of gear, but shiny. Woo! In addition to doing all the normal things enchanted armor does, this set lets me move faster and jump higher. Pretty bog standard upgrade as armor goes, but the utility of it's nice, so moving on. My next destination is the warp point due south of the waterfall on the edges of the mountainside. It's a convenient launching point, and it also has tomatoes growing nearby, which will help a little bit with the whole dietary variety thing. At this point in the run, there are many ways of getting around the food requirements, but I honestly just can't be bothered to make any of them work, so we are still eating regular food like a pleb. Further exploration to the west links me up with the redwood POI, giving me brown flowers and heaping scads of shimmerlies for future ethereal bloomification. Looking back on my previous playthrough of this pack, I seem to remember shimmerlies being super hard to get a hold of, but now that I replay it, the map makers were kind of ridiculously generous with the things. At this point, I could go ahead and chill out on world exploring. I have all the flower colors I need to do Botania, since there are ways of getting the rest once you progress far enough. But I'm having a little bit too much fun doing this, and it would be a lot easier to not have to mess around with them, so I opt to keep collecting. This time a dark green variety from the jungle villages north of the redwood tree, and I additionally secure samples of the Tainted Hunter Ocelot and Tainted Chicken mobs for future... calling it use is a little bit speculative. This is mostly me just hoarding at this point. After that, things start getting more interesting. The last two flower samples I really want to grab are located on two floating islands. The first is to the far south and is reasonably close by to the Redwood Warp, but the second is all the way to the northwest, which is as far as you can possibly get from anything that I've been doing on this map. Both are floating over the middle of an ocean, which makes my life a little bit difficult, but the distance makes purifying them logistically complicated. First things first, the light green flowers to the south. With enchanted armor, my movement speed and held breath duration are high enough to make an aquatic invasion feasible, so I can just glump along the bottom of the ocean and nerd pull up directly underneath a purified area. The resulting build is gonna make for some interesting conversations with the locals, but I figure it probably isn't any worse than those ridiculous modern art pieces that they leave in small to medium-sized US cities to try and raise property values. Does living in an underwater biodome count as being basement dwellers? If nothing else, it is certifiably beer tab free, so at least that part is progress. More important than the flowers, though, is the nearby loot chest on this island, which happens to contain an item called a division sigil. I'm going to have oodles of fun with this sucker down the line, but for now suffice to say that it is just very important. The real question is how I get to the other island. I could try to bushmack my way across the map to get to it, but I have better things to do with my life than spam craft silver relief potions and crash the testificate economy, and you have better things to do with your life than watch me do it, so let's not. Did you know that Blightfall has no map border? Yep, you can just boat anywhere you want if you feel like blowing 3 hours of your life doing it. And if you go out far enough, the map makers didn't even bother tainting the oceans because there's not supposed to be anything out here. This means all I have to do is boat over to the border closest to the other island, repeat the same subaquatic turd tower tech, and just like that, purple flowers. Plus, free NPCs. Not sure what I'm going to do with them, but I might be able to farm armor drops or something, and at this point I'm basically just playing a Nintendo knockoff game. More important than that, though, through some miraculous confluence of world generation, the mob cap not being sponged up by the purple people eaters, and sheer dumb luck, I got a natural peck spawn. Yeah, little bit late to the party there, bud. I can't put pecks in safari nuts for some reason, probably because that would be horrendously overpowered, so I just give it a bunch of stuff to keep it from despawning and trap it in a box. Who knows, maybe it'll be useful later. Probably not. So what am I going to do with all this wonderful botanical technology? Well, at the moment, precisely nothing, because I got distracted. I've hit up somewhere around 2/3 of the useful POIs, and in the process pilfered a substantial number of shimmer leaves. I think it's time to do something with them. Shimmer leaves can be turned into ethereal blooms with a relatively simple alchemical procedure using sano, herba, precanto, and vidium essence, and my future builds are going to start requiring quite a lot of space, so I think it's an excellent idea to get working on these as soon as possible. The sources of essentia for this process are a little bit interesting. Herba is basically just any green thing, so that's trivial. The easiest source of sano for me is bulk crafting cream out of milk, though at 16 buckets of the stuff per flower, I'm probably going to be put on a hit list by PETA for what I had to do to the cow I got it from. Profane wands, once their contract runs out, transform into an inert variation of the wand with 64 precanto essence in it. No idea why, but no complaints here. And the annoying one, which is Vidium, can be bulk sourced by aggressively farming tainted mobs courtesy of my powered spawner. Let's start by making, I don't know, a stack. That seems like a nice, sane, normal number of flowers. For reference, I would be shocked if you could naturally loot more than half of this from the entire map, but hey, I like to aim high. Armed with 80 ethereal blooms and a delicious and nutritious snack of raw mutton and turnips, I then start purifying what will eventually be my new home. The Sky Islands are surrounded by water, and the bulk of the island is hovering over an area that is dug out all the way down to bedrock and doesn't really have that many caves in it. These factors, combined with their relative isolation from the rest of the map, mean that once they are cleaned up, their mob cap is largely insulated from the grape guzzler epidemic, and it tends to stay that way because there's no easy way for taint to reinfect the island. Once you evict the current tenants and clean the mess up they leave behind, this makes them excellent places to live, and has been where I've stationed all of my previous Blightfall runs to this day. And with just a dollop of movie magic and more than a little bit of time spent playing with dollies, welcome to my new home. I didn't bother setting up any farms yet because crops are going to start being a whole lot less important here in a moment, and it's easier to breed up passive mobs than it is to move them, but all the important bits are here, so let's get working. By which I actually mean let's get started shearing the silverwood tree and getting that out of here. Where we're going, we don't need magical forests. My first order of business is to take another couple of not very brief at all voyages to various locations around the map. Yeah, we're still doing that. My stock of crafting supplies is in kind of a weird space right now, and the only easy way of getting samples of a couple of really common materials that I've just never encountered is to ethereal bloom spam my way over and rip them out of the ground. I kind of feel bad for the taint at this point. I won't say that it offers no resistance exactly, but the resulting conflict of taint versus blooms does do justice to the phrase plasma sword through peanut butter. So in the future, it does seem to imply that all of my taint problems can be solved by really aggressive botany. The last ingredient in this whole mess is netherrack, a wonderful substance sourced by pitching myself off the side of a floating island to the north and scuba diving towards a nearby volcano, where I then get to search for and subsequently pilfer piles of compacted pigman poop. Such a glamorous lifestyle that I get to live. 007 wishes he had it this good. So, Botania. It's Botania? Yes, sirree. You got all the good flowers, like day blooms, which I stole from a waterfall POI and just never bothered mentioning. And endo flames, which burn things to make mana, which is basically just liquid game state progression juice if you've never played it. And all of those other flowers that we totally pay attention to and care about, because we will definitely for sure not just beat the entire pack using endo flame spam, right everyone? Right? Right, yeah, no, we're absolutely going to brick the game up with Endo Flame spam. It's nothing personal, Vazki, you made a great mod. It's just that, well, something has to be an optimal strategy, and it just so happens that Endo Flames hit the sweet spot of being easy to automate and dirt cheap, which is fitting for a flower. Before much interesting happens with Botania, though, I have to take a bit of a detour to charge up my Division Sigil. I really couldn't care less about most of the stuff this unlocks, but it does let me make unbreakable swords and an axe that regenerates hunger when held, which are both super useful for various reasons, and as a side effect of the charging process, I can create something called Cursed Earth, which is one of the potential paths I have towards making mob farms, so it's good tech to have all around. The enormous swarm of hostile uber buffed mobs is just a pleasant side effect. Fun fact, mob griefing is disabled in this world for some reason. I have no idea why. It's not like I ever bothered turning it off on my own, but okay. Anyway, back to Botania. If you ignore the mess that it took to get the flowers, the usual old version Botania progression arc still applies. Apply Dayblooms to Mana Spreader and Mana Spreader to Diluted Mana Pool. Apply Petals to Mana Pool. Make Endoflame from Petals. Apply Endoflame to Mana Spreader, apply Mana Spreader to Diluted Mana Pool. Repeat ad nauseum until you have enough mana production to suit your fancy. Once you have mana, you can then start playing Thrift Shop Simulator to collect all of the wonderful random items needed to make the 5 runes for a Terrasteel Agglomeration Plate. This is what I needed the netherrack for, by the way. A whole 1 block of the stuff. To make a nether brick, to make a fire rune, to make the plate. Whee! Progression. On a related note, I am reasonably certain that the amount of time I have spent watching progress bars tick up in this game measures in the hundreds of hours. Now that you have runes, it's Terrasteel time. No mana? No problem. Just snort some more charcoal. All the cool kids are doing it. Not enough charcoal? No worries. Beat up trees and get a jumpstart on that whole global warming thing. Don't worry, the colony ship only cares about taint, not having 50-degree summers. Charcoal snorting equals mana. Mana equals Terrasteel. Terrasteel plus mana pylons plus gameplay equals 1 discount key lime flavored nether portal with a freshly exploitable native population that has no concept of supply and demand. Unfortunately for me, I cannot travel through this portal. This is probably a good thing for them though. But they do give me some of their pink theme progression mechanics, which is good enough for now. So that's as far as I can get with Botania. Let's tackle some other logistical hurdles. Botania's technological development requires me to untangle the Gordian knot that is an optimal progression path in this pack, but as with most things, the solution starts with squeezing testificates until they pop like piñatas. Also like piñatas, when they pop, they're full of goodies, which are, in this case, the desiccated body parts of random monsters, which I then spam in great and glorious quantity around my infusion setup so that it will stop acting like it's a washing machine that I threw a brick in every time I wiggle my wand in its general direction. Blightfall disables the nether for balancing reasons, so the only way I know of to get your first nether star is to infuse 3 wither skulls using their custom infusion recipe. Coincidentally, I have a freshly stabilized washing machine that can do just that. That's convenient. Except when it isn't, because the infusion process takes such an incredibly long time that I ended up finishing all of the other prep work before the skulls are done, and I still ended up twiddling my thumbs waiting on the things. 3 skulls, combined with some soul sand from the same volcano I hit up for pigman poop earlier, and the absolutely flawless and foolproof strategy of hit it till it's dead, net me a bog-standard progression item, I mean beautiful nether star. In a stunning example of my general lack of short-term memory, you will notice that I take the time to prepare a cheese kill setup for this wither, completely forgetting that mob griefing is disabled despite having pointed that out literally not even 5 minutes ago. Endgame Botania stuff is gated behind a procedure called the Ritual of Gaia, which is a very fancy way of saying it makes you farm a bunch of stuff to kill a boss, and all the good stuff needs boss drops. Googly Eyes here is very particular about its spawning conditions and is mildly annoying to cheese, so instead of bothering with that, I consume an inordinately large amount of performance-enhancing beverages and apply my sword to the problem until it goes away. Pre-1.8 Strength 2 potions give a utterly ridiculous 260% damage boost, and that combined with a very, very well enchanted sword and functionally maxed out armor, vampirism for health stealing, regeneration, and the pounce damage buff, make the whole process relatively trivial. They really ought to call it the Ritual of Stalling at this point, because it seems like that's all the boss ever does. The Googly Eye fight has a unexpected useful side benefit in that it spawns wither skeletons during one of its phases, so I make sure to net a couple for future duplication as well. But wait, there's more! By taking the boss drops from the first fight, called Gaia Spirits, and rubbing them on a Terrasteel ingot, you get a Gaia ingot. When you use this ingot to tick off Gogglebox, you don't get a normal fight, you get Google Search Engine 2, Eclectic Boogaloo. This boss has a different soundtrack, stalls harder, and is supposed to be more difficult than the first one, I guess, but mostly it just stalls harder, drops more stuff, sends the entire fight peeing lasers at you, stalls harder, runs around like a coward more than usual, and stalls harder. Oh, and I have to fight a bunch of them, for reasons. Hold, please. This item right here is Reasons. Gigolo Elephant here drops an item called the Dice of Fate, which, when used, gives you one of 6 random unique items that stand head and shoulders above most of the other gear this mod pack has to offer. My first item, the Eye of Flugel, lets me set and teleport to any 12 locations in the Minecraftian universe that I want for absolutely free. There is a good reason that these got nerfed in later versions of the pack, but yes, please, we like this. We like it a lot. The second item I get is the Fruit of Grisha, which is basically just a better healing axe without the axe part. It's a food item that never runs out or suffers from diminishing returns, which is nice, but I definitely would have appreciated getting one of the more combat-oriented items. The third item is the Ring of Thor. Very funny, game. This does precisely nothing unless you're using a Terra Shatterer, and as such is going to be entirely useless to me for the foreseeable future. I finally get my combat upgrade by Dice 4 in the form of Excalibur, which, fun fact, etymologically speaking probably once meant something along the lines of sharp sword. Unlike its Arthurian legend, this one does not come from a rock or make you immortal, but in exchange it makes you move faster, shoots P-lasers, and has massive aim hacks, which will make tracking down gangrene elbows the Telefragger a whole lot easier for my next few kills. It also accepts enchantments, so it will be my de facto weapon moving forwards because, yes, those enchantments apply to the P-lasers, and yes, that is exactly as powerful as you think it is. Yeah, this is a whole lot better. It's a pity that the 1280% speed buff it says it gives you is a visual glitch, but it still does its level best to cause ocular trauma to anyone who has the misfortune to use it, so I'm willing to overlook that. The sword has this interesting property where its projectiles inherit the enchantments you place on the weapon, which as a side effect means I can sit back and farm health off the boss using the vampirism enchantment and take this fight like an idiot without getting punished for it. This is also the first boss whose dice doesn't give me a new item, but such is the EA lifestyle, I guess. Way too much charcoal later, and I'm able to source the last 2 items. The Ring of Loki does something. I don't know, really. It's something to do with world interaction and building. I've never had much of a reason to use it. But the real treasure is the Ring of Odin, which grants immunity to drowning, suffocation, fire damage, and fall damage, and in addition gives you a honking big health boost. You can craft all of them together into one ring so they don't take up slots, but I don't usually bother because I don't actually care about the other 2. Now that I'm suitably kitted up with only the best crusty 2015-era anime references and my trusty goth bathrobe of marginal insanity, I'm ready to go and share the joy and pleasure of Operation Hid It Till It's Dead in Angstland itself. The intended way of sourcing primordial pearls is to complete a dungeony maze thing that you access by unlocking the totem I built my base next to with severe ocular trauma and a bit of magic juice. I have no intention of sourcing most of my pearls this way, but it's here, the eyes are cheap, and I'm sick and tired of brainy zombies munching my backside when I forget to go to bed at night, so opening the dungeon serves double duty to get rid of the node and replace it with one that spawns emo death specters. Don't really know what I was thinking here. Anyway, the dungeon itself is a giant maze, and your goal is to find a key to unlock and spawn the boss. In the base version of the mod, it is actually quite tricky, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed or whittled down or lost, but my new anime sword is so overpowered I can pretty much just ignore the intended engagement mechanics in favor of looking at the floor and holding left click, and letting the aimbot urine stream take care of anything that looks sideways at me. So the real issue I spend most of my time grappling with here is my crummy sense of direction and the pathological need to loot every single piece of shiny pocket lint I come across. One 45-minute long pop quiz on depth-first search algorithms later, and I am the proud owner of an iPad 20 and this ominous-looking door thing. Huh, I sure wonder what'll happen if I open this. Why yes, this looks like a boss arena. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, my good friend Volthoom, the angsty here, is a massive pushover. Thaumcraft was not balanced around players being armed with swords that shoot aimbot urine streams, which is a massive oversight given the Minecraft modding community, but I suppose even Anazor couldn't plan for everything. Poor Volthoom gets dunked on in roughly 30 seconds flat, I get the pearl, and the rest is history. This pearl unlocks the last of my research, the usual advanced alchemical furnace upgrades, a giant lore dump or 2, and the demonic baby rattle, which are all basically going to be useless in this run, but I go ahead and crank them out anyway. But I do discover that there's one extra one here that was probably a custom edition in later versions of the pack because I don't remember it being in the one I played. It unlocks the ability to craft giant tentacle spawn eggs, with the flavor text saying that it seems appropriate that, as the savior of the world, you should also be its destroyer. I certainly don't need giant tentacles for that, but if nothing else, it does explain why the whole continent got corrupted. Knowing what I do about the internet, if all it took to summon giant tentacles in real life was a bit of black magic, Earth would be done for in like 30 minutes tops. So really, the taint problem was probably pretty much unavoidable. That was the easy part. For my next trick, I shall spontaneously generate diamonds out of nothing. Well, not nothing exactly, but you can purchase diamond tools from villagers and pulverize them to get raw diamonds, which is a massive improvement over mining the things by hand. I was originally going to use this to segue into the overpowered nonsense that is infused seeds, but I'm sad to report that this version of the mod doesn't let you accelerate their growth with the Hoe of Growth, which kind of put a damper on that whole plan. All this newfound wealth then immediately gets turned right back around and crafted up into a bunch of fun new toys. Specifically, a couple of wrath cages, some blank imprinting crystals, and, most importantly, a bunch of diamond spikes. This combination of materials should immediately clue the genre-savvy folks in the audience into what I'm going to do, but for those who aren't as familiar, let me tell you a story. Wrath cages are one of Thaumcraft's answers to how do I make mobs with this mod, and are basically just Essentia-fueled mob spawners with a couple of extra bonuses. The first is that you can tell them what to spawn by killing a mob using a Diabolist fork while holding an imprinted crystal. The mob soul goes in the crystal goes in the spawner, and the spawner will then poop out that kind of mob when fed an appropriate variety of Essentia, which can either be Era, Decidia, or a Essentia type specific to the mob the cage is configured to, which is usually one that's kind of associated with the mob, but not always. For example, blazes require Ignis, witches require Precanto, and villagers require Lucrum. The return rate of Essentia per unit mob is not all that great, but it's still a pretty good deal all around unless you're one of the mobs being farmed. That is where things get interesting. Ira and Decidia are incredibly inconvenient Essentia types to produce in bulk, and the only even theoretically feasible options for me right now would be melting down TNT or beds, and neither of which are something I really want to try and automate. That limitation reduces the potential payloads of my Wrath Cage to something whose mob-specific Essentia type is something I can easily and scalably automate. You might expect this to be difficult. You would be wrong. Blazes require, roughly, 2 Essentia to spawn. When killed with looting, they drop, roughly, 2 Blaze Rods, which have an Essentia value of 8 Ignis for Precanto, and can be burned to produce 24 items worth of smelting time, or they can be crafted down into blaze powder for a pure source of Ignis. Add on to that, blazes also have an unusually high XP yield, which means that in addition to their regular drops, they also produce somewhere around 600 millibuckets of free mob essence if killed with something that drops XP over a sewer. But wait, it gets better. One of the highest priority mobs for me to automate the farming of is witches, so that I can ensure stable supplies of sugar for my metallum farms, glowstone, redstone, and gunpowder. Witch wrath cages consume Precanto Essentia, and by sheer coincidence, Precanto Essentia is a byproduct of smelting blaze rods for the blaze wrath cages. The resulting design is elegant, simple, and so completely and utterly unoriginal that it basically dates back to when mob spawners were first added to the game. It's a box with some things to shove mobs into a stabby thing. I've also added some things, in this case a sewer and hopper hawk to pick up all the goodies that the mobs give me and move them where they're supposed to go, because otherwise the whole setup would be kind of pointless. The one thing I haven't quite finished is the walls, because I have somehow managed to run out of both sand and sandstone to process into sand, which is a solid indicator that I need to get some automated factories up and running pronto, because that is getting ridiculous. So, let's take it for a spin. Yeah, well, something had to go wrong, didn't it? Today, I learned that extra utility spikes are weird and broken in this pack, and for some reason the gold and diamond variants don't actually kill mobs. The game treats them like wooden spikes, which drop mobs to half a heart and do nothing after the fact, and this is extremely vexing, but in the grand scheme of things is probably not the end of the world. Iron spikes do kill the mobs, but they don't make blazes drop blaze rods because they count as an environmental kill, which means that I am forced to go with Plan C, a dynamism tablet with an unbreakable, max enchanted etheric sword. It isn't as shiny, and I am mildly annoyed that a 9-year-old mod pack isn't getting bug fix support for what is clearly a game-breaking issue, but it should work. Spoilers, it doesn't really work. Mobs keep clipping through the walls, the tablet keeps trying to swing at XP orbs because dynamism tablets are just a whole new level of special. Mobs aren't dying fast enough, it's kind of a hot mess. It's also a mess that's going to need to get fixed in the next episode because I do not have the time, or frankly the patience, to try and deal with dynamism tablet jankery at the moment. So, thank you for your time. If you want to snag yourself a goose-themed mousepad, the link for that's in the description, and I hope you enjoyed.